Hello and welcome to a very special agency office hours. I'm Karl Sakas at Sakas and Company. Today we're talking all about paying for college as an agency owner. Now, as an agency consultant, why am I talking about that topic? Well, if you are an agency owner, due to how colleges count pass-through profits from your S Corp or LLC, your family is unlikely to get any college financial aid. What does that mean? Well, given that even sending your child to a four-year public university right now could cost you at least $150,000 and more in the future if your kids aren't going to school right now, paying for college, if you have kids and they'll be going to college, is likely to be your largest expense beyond retirement and real estate for your family. Fortunately, you have some options to get better results in an expensive, difficult process. And that's why I brought in a special guest expert. Stephen Boatman is a financial planner and, not just that, an expert on paying for college. This particular session follows up on the article series that I've done on paying for college as an agency owner. We'll share a link to that in chat or in the description if you're watching the video, and would love to answer your questions. Now, we've gotten a number of questions in advance. For people who are on the call live, feel free to share any additional questions in chat. We'll try to get as many as we can. And Stephen has also volunteered, if we don't get to your question, we will track down the answer for you. With all that in mind, Stephen, welcome to Sakas and Company Agency Office Hours.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate you having me here.
And I appreciate your volunteering here. Definitely helpful to help people out. So before we dig in on the main list of questions, maybe if you could introduce yourself if people aren't familiar with you and your work yet.
Yeah, so my name's Stephen Boatman. I'm a CFP certified financial planner and CSLP certified student loan professional. I work with pretty much the gambit of age ranges, but it tends to be more 30 to 50-year-olds preparing for retirement, and saving for college and paying off student loans tends to be a noticeable topic in most of my conversations. So I forced myself to learn more about it than most people would like to, probably.
I didn't even know. We had connected through Russell Kroger, my longtime financial planner, and I asked him if he had a recommendation on someone to speak on this topic, and he immediately recommended you. I did not even know about the Certified Student Loan Professional CSLP designation. Is that a relatively new thing, or sort of how did that come about?
Yeah, it's been around for the past, I want to say 5 or so years. There's an attorney named Heather Jarvis who had a website where she was answering all the student loan questions, and she was getting swamped. So she made this education system so other people could help her answer these tough questions.
Ah, nice, nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig in. Maybe just to frame things in general, what is the purpose of college? What's the point as people are thinking about that?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think it's one that not many people really ask themselves. And so what I would tell most parents to think of is preparing and saving for college is meant to improve your child's life after college. You want to make it easier for them to find a job that they enjoy and can provide for themselves and their family than they would have otherwise. And so, what I try to encourage is for them to take a step back and to look at what are my child's specific skill sets and how does that line up with what the world needs in terms of where they're hiring? Is there an alignment there that we can find? If that route travels through college, then great. Let's figure out how to save for it and give our kids that opportunity. But if the skill sets align with some other route that is maybe through an apprenticeship, a community college, or something else entirely, then great. Let's push them there because they're probably going to have a better chance of succeeding going that way.
That makes sense. In fact, just last week, the Wall Street Journal had a cover article. Gen Z picks up the tool belt. More young workers go into skilled trades amid higher pay and skepticism about college.
Yeah. And it's something, if you're spending $100,000, your child may be better off if you gave that to them as a small business loan to build a website and do marketing and buy inventory. But again, it's on a per case basis. But I had a client the other day and they did a 4-year stint at Appalachian State, North Carolina, graduated, got a sales job, hated it, and then decided they want to be a pilot. And so now they have to spend, 60 to $90,000 going to pilot school, and
Wow.
they'll enjoy it then, but it just kind of delays this career that they wanted to have and their overall financial standing a little bit.
And even within that, I was traveling recently and there was a deadheading pilot who was chatting with one of the flight attendants. The flight attendant said that she was doing pilot training and she was looking at a particular program where she would sign a 5-year contract and they would pay for the training expenses. And the pilot said, sort of be careful because you may get locked in at a low salary as a result, like
Yeah.
60,000 a year, versus if she self-paid, she might be able to get a job paying 150,000 rather
Yeah.
than getting locked in.
That's a
Um,
great point.
so, I, when would you recommend that parents talk with their kids about their post high school plans? Keeping in mind, by the way, people who are listening to this, some have kids who are in school right now. Some have kids who we have one of the questions like they're still in the family planning stage. The child is not born yet. So
Yeah.
I realize it's a huge range, but when would you recommend that parents start talking with their kids?
Yeah. I mean, kids pick up more than you think they do. And so it depends on kind of where they fall in the pecking order. If you have one kid or three kids, it's going to be different, right? So if you have three kids, the youngest one is going to expect what happened to the oldest one to happen to them.
Yes.
And they're also going to pick it up earlier. So if you talk to the oldest child, their freshman year of high school, about how much they can expect for you to provide for college or where they can try to go,
Mhm.
then if the youngest sibling's 4 years younger, they're going to get that talk basically at fifth grade, right?
Mm,
And so some of it is thinking through, how many kids do you have? Where do they fall in the pecking order? I recommend at least freshman or sophomore year, allowing your kid to know how much they can expect you to pay for. Are you going to just pay for A's and B's? Are you covering everything?
mm,
Uh, will they be able to keep anything that they can find on their own? Right. And so again, this is a big transition for kids where they get this big piece of responsibility, right? They're like, okay, I went from everybody telling me what to do my whole life for the most part. Maybe you choose a sport here and there, your friends, things like that. But this is a big decision.
right.
And so you talk with your children about like, hey, do you think you want to go to college? You don't have to if you don't want to. And if you do, here's what you can expect us to pay for. And if you can get under this threshold, say you can, as the parent, you want to cover $20,000 per year. Any amount you can get below that, we'll give you as a graduation gift to buy a new car, house,
Mm,
something like that. And it just allows them to be bought in, right? There's some incentive for them to think through this now financially that wasn't there before. It was just this, imaginary thing that everybody's kind of expected to do.
that's a great point. It gets them thinking about the mechanics of things.
Yeah, and actually knowing the cost of things, which is rare for a lot of those kids.
Right. So how much should people be saving per month? I realize, I think everyone listening knows they should be saving something and they
Yeah,
should be saving sooner rather than later. But what would be your advice about how much to be saving?
no, great. I would say most people, when they think through saving for college, they think about this, $100,000 figure in today's dollars, which is a reasonable figure, whether we like it or not. Uh, but what I would encourage is to not save 100% of that college savings within, what everybody goes to, which is the 529 account,
Mhm.
because there's certain limitations there. And so I normally recommend people, I mean, I wrote a blog on a list of ways to think through this, but as far as the savings is concerned, to save around 50 to 75% of college expenses, which if you're going to an in-state school, it's called 25 grand a year. You're
Mhm.
going to want to save around 125 to $200 per month, depending on the return you get between age 0 and 18. And that's assuming you start at age 0. If you're starting at 10, it's a different conversation.
Got it. So basically, the more the better is generally good. Now, sometimes I hear questions about, I'm trying to decide between saving for college versus retirement. On one hand, there's the joke, there are no scholarships for retirement. On the other hand, you can choose to delay your retirement or do a part-time retirement or things like that, whereas your kid's high school graduation is happening whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
What's your advice on balancing those two?
I think one of the biggest gifts a parent can give to their children is to not be a burden on them in their later years of life. If they can be self-sufficient through those retirement years. That's the number one gift you can provide to your kids.
Okay.
Beyond that, I would put college next.
Mhm.
There, the time value of money plays on both sides of the coin, right? The money invested now is worth more than money invested later because it has 10 more years to grow.
Right.
And so whether that's going towards your retirement goal or your college goal, I would say as a parent, you're probably not seeing it that different. If you're one of those people that says I'm gonna pay this much for my kids' college, it's either going to come from a 529 account or your retirement account. You're going to make it happen somehow or cash flow. And
Got it.
so I would preference retirement savings and then college savings.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess because worst case, they can get loans and potentially you could help them with the loans. Um,
Yeah.
you need to be saving for retirement now so that it can grow.
And college is such an unknown. If your kid is, 5 years old, you have no idea really what direction they're going to go. And the range in cost is wild. And so that's why I don't recommend always, shooting for the specific number at this age.
Got it. So you're saying that their like finger painting skills are not a prediction of getting, say, a scholarship to art school.
Yeah, despite what the Duke Tips program tells you, yes.
There we go. Could we look a bit more about strategies to use for saving for college? Anything else you'd recommend people keep in mind?
Yeah, the one thing, and it's difficult for most W-2 employees to wrap their heads around this point, but for business owners, it's a little easier. And
Okay.
that is increasing your income is the main way to improve all savings in your life, right? So there's this chart out there that shows that, okay, people with earnings over $500,000, it's much easier for them to save 20 or 30% of their income than
Mm,
people who make 100,000. And it's not because they're more frugal. It's just because it's easier for them to meet their basic living standards. And then
right.
the excess, it's easier to save it. And so if you can increase your income, that's priority number one. Outside of that,
Mhm.
the 529 account is not the end all be all for college savings. There are some state prepaid plans, like Florida is famous for theirs. You can look at alternative investments. So outside of investing in your business for increased income, you can also look at, maybe you have a niche in real estate that gives you some 12% or 14% return. Are you doing some private lending to a family friend or something that gives you this increased return? That increased return is worth more than the tax advantage in a 529 account, if that makes sense. And so just making sure that they're not always letting the tax tail wag the investment dog, so to speak.
Makes sense. Because ultimately the goal is to grow and get the money you need. The tax savings are helpful, but shouldn't be the number one thing.
Correct. Yeah, if you're getting a 12% return guaranteed in some investment versus investing in a 529 account expecting 8%, I'll take the 12% and pay the taxes happily because I'm going to have more money at the end of 20 years that way.
That makes sense. And actually, one of the audience questions we got from Aaron, he asked, is it better to use money from the 529 first or pay out of pocket for as long as possible?
Yeah, some of this depends. I know lot of these agency owners are going to qualify for FAFSA. If you
Mhm.
do qualify for FAFSA, it is worth delaying that 529 account and
Okay.
withdrawing in later years. And kind of outside of that, regardless, the 529 benefit is the growth in there is tax free. You can avoid capital gains tax when it's used for college expenses. And so because of that, I would say let's spend out of our own dollars first and delay 529s as long as we know we're going to empty that 529 bucket. If we're nervous we won't empty it, then let's just start pulling out immediately and make sure we get that to zero.
So basically, for instance, if you have one child, you have less flexibility, whereas if, you're paying for your first kid and you got other kids later,
Yeah.
you draw down for there. Okay,
And they're gonna maybe they graduate in 3 years and you're stuck with, oh no, I have 20 more $1,000. It's a good problem to have. You can always withdraw it, but let's be as
yeah.
efficient as we can if there's less flexibility.
Okay, that makes sense. Speaking of the FAFSA, I know I've been seeing a lot of articles about, sort of FAFSA disasters and how the education department has just totally messed things up. I know there's the FAFSA, the CSS. Uh, what should people be thinking about there? Recognizing that most people who are listening, if you're an agency owner and you're getting, you know, ideally making a couple 100,000 a year or more in salary, plus you're getting more than that in pass-through profits. the odds are, from my doing the various calculators, you're probably not going to qualify for aid. But what should people think about FAFSA and CSS?
Yeah, and if somebody is already that high of an earner, they're not
Mhm.
going to qualify either way. But the
Okay.
CSS just is a deeper dive into your net worth than FAFSA is. So FAFSA, you can hide things in your small business. You can hide things in a car. If you went and bought a Toyota Land Cruiser, it wouldn't qualify in your FAFSA. But CSS looks at all of those things.
Hmm.
And not all colleges require a CSS profile. So it's going to be your higher end colleges, your Chapel Hills, your Dukes, your Wake Forest, Harvard, you know, all the more prominent ones, more prestigious colleges are going to require CSS, and it's just much harder to hide assets in there.
Got it. And
Yeah.
for those listening, that's the College Scholarship Service CSS profile. Um, Speaking of planning ahead, we got a question from Rachel, said that she's 5 years out on college. Is there anything to be thinking about now as it relates to, say, spending down, moving money, investments, etc.?
Yeah, it's hard. Just somebody says, "Hey, should I be doing something else with my money besides paying down student loan debt?" It
Oh,
depends on what her opportunities are. So there's that opportunity cost.
oh, and I think this is 5 years, as in college is 5 years in the future.
Oh, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. That was
Okay,
it's ambiguous, but I read it as their kids don't start college until 5 years from now.
gotcha. Um, if we take FAFSA and CSS out of the picture and we're just saving for college, I
Right.
would say it's a decent time to maybe make one last investment in your 529 account
Mm,
because the benefit of it is for the money to be invested in there for a long period of time. And so when we get to that 3 years till college, I
yeah.
typically dial back, if not stop, 529 contributions because the
Mm.
benefits are limited and it just ties up your money more. It's less flexible.
Okay, so basically it locks it up in the tax advantage account, but the likely tax-free, hopefully gains will be low, and then you can't withdraw it for any other purpose.
Yes, and the shorter the time horizon, the less confident we are that the market's going to guaranteed be at a higher level, right? So if we have 10 years, I am very confident. I'd say 90% confident, unless you have that lost decade of 2000 to 2010, basically,
Right.
where you're like, oh, that really didn't pan out. But if we were invested in '09 to 12 or 13, it was much better. But long story short, if you're invested for a long period of time, you can be much more confident it's going to be higher level of capital gains you're actually avoiding within the 529. But 2 to 3 years, it could have minimal capital gains and not be worth having that capital tied up within those extra rules.
Speaking of 529s, should you use the 529 in your own state or not? I know there are certain tax benefits, but I know that, in our planning discussions, you mentioned there are different limits on how much you can contribute, different investment options. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a few things to consider. One is, are you going to be close to maxing out your 529? Some 529s have a maximum contribution of around $220,000, and others have a maximum contribution of $529,000,
Mm.
as the name suggests. Um, so it depends on how high of a level you want to have in there and what contributions you want to make. The other one is, does your state provide a tax deduction? So North Carolina does not provide a state tax deduction, but other states do. So if you are in a state that doesn't provide a state tax deduction, then there's no incentive to use your specific state's 529. I would suggest looking at the entire market of 529 plans. So, Michigan has a good 529 plan. I think Utah used to. I like the Vanguard one a lot. They tend to have a pretty low fee. The expense ratios and the funds are low as well. There's also more flexibility within them. So some
Mm.
529 plans require you to buy the target date fund for your child's expected college date. But other 529s will allow you to take on more risk if you're comfortable with that. Say you want to keep an 80/20, 80% stock, 20% bond portfolio for college savings. You can do that within Vanguard, but other 529s won't allow it. And so there's a few things to consider when you're choosing that.
And also, presumably, you'll save on expenses if you're doing index funds rather than target date funds as well.
Yes, you
You're
will.
doing it yourself. Okay. There. I mean, a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah.
By the way, for anyone who's joining live, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, go ahead and share it in chat. Glad to pass that along. Let's see. So, what about if someone has kids who have not been born yet? The question we got from Tyler, starting a 529, still in the family planning stage. For instance, could you put an account in a relative's name without impacting their taxes? Or like what do you do if you are really diligent about saving, but the beneficiary is not born yet?
Yeah. No, this kind of gets into the dynasty 529 planning phase. And I'm sure what that question is wondering is there any penalty for changing beneficiaries? And 90% of the time there isn't, but there's a danger here, which is the generation skipping transfer tax.
Okay.
And so if you say, I'm going to name my spouse as the beneficiary, and then I'm going to transfer it to my children in the future, that's a problem. That is not good. You're skipping a generation there. And there
Okay.
may be a transfer tax if that amount is above the gift tax allowance, right? And that's $18,000 per person per year.
Okay.
And so if that account's not getting above that $18,000 number, it's no problem. You can transfer to them. You're not going to worry about that.
Okay.
But if it gets above that, and if it's noticeably above that, like with the dynasty plans where you're contributing, $360,000 in a year into these things, then there could be taxes. But for the smaller levels, it's not a huge fear. If
Mhm.
you want to not worry about that at all, then name somebody that's in their generation. So if they have a cousin,
Okay.
or a stepsister or something like that, you can open it in their name and then roll it over.
Could you talk a bit more about what is a Dynasty 529 plan
Yeah.
and when would it be a match for people?
So a Dynasty 529 plan is a fairly new planning topic for financial planners. And what it is where somebody is typically trying to avoid estate taxes. Right now those levels, I think it's 13 something million per person, so 26 million per couple. So that impacts almost nobody right now.
Right.
But it's going to change in the future. I'm not it's for sure going to change. It very well
Something will
could come
happen.
down. In 2026, I forget what it's called. Like the shelter, the time horizon runs out on that, and they're
Mhm.
going to relook at what that number should be. And so, say it comes down to 5 million or 1 million like it was before, it may become much more popular. But all it was is it's where you make the maximum contribution possible into your grandchildren or children's 529, and that's $90,000 per person per year per beneficiary. So that means that a couple could do 90,000 each to one child or one grandchild. That's
Mhm.
180,000 to one. And then if there's another one, they could do 180,000 to another. That's $360,000 of contribution in one year into 529 accounts. And the benefit there is the growth over that time period is typically so exponential that you have $1 million+ by the time they go to college. Let's
Mhm.
say they both spend $300,000 combined. You're at 700,000, but then it grows for 5 more years till they have kids, then 18 more years till those kids that go to college. You could have a $3 or $4 million 529 account by then. And it becomes this education savings account dynasty for this family that allows them to pay for pilot school or trade school or college. And
Mhm.
maybe it means that college expenses aren't as much of a weight on those future generations. And they now have freedom to think through what they actually want to do, where cost isn't a factor. But
Mhm.
that's what it is. It's a long-term education family account.
That makes sense. And it sounds like it's going to be complicated enough that people should talk with their financial planner, uh, to get advice on their specifics.
Absolutely. And something to keep in mind too is those 529s can be used for kindergarten through college. And so say you want to provide for private school for your kids growing up or some other thing, it's also a great account for that. But yes, talk with a financial planner on the Dynasty 529s. That's a lot to navigate on your own.
All right. We have a live question. Chris asks, she mentions, think read that FAFSA will ignore the value of your business. If, say, the CSS takes the value of your business into account, how is that value of your business calculated?
So the exact calculation, you have room to discount your business value, I would say up to 20 or 30%, because as I'm sure you're all aware, business values can range wildly depending on the type of clientele you have or how you're paid and how long you've been around, your brand awareness. And so there's room for discount within there, but to cut it down 90% is very difficult. But a 20 or 30% discount is reasonable.
That makes sense. For those listening, my go-to recommendation for agency valuations is punctuation. That's Jonathan Baker and David C. Baker. A number of my clients have worked with them and had a good experience. So, I mean, of course, various people can do it, but they specialize in agency valuations. Um, let's see. So, if you were to generalize, what is the income level where you should assume you're not going to get any financial aid? Is
Yeah,
there a number? I realize it varies, but
there's actually a chart that I'll share with you and you can send it out after if you want to. It's called Student Aid Index. And basically, if you make over 150,000 in income, your odds of receiving financial aid are low. But it depends on how expensive the school is. If the school costs $80,000 a year, you very well could get financial aid to send your kids there. But again, you're paying $80,000 a year. So is it worth the trade-off is another question.
yeah, I was
But
with a client whose spouse works at an expensive private school, and basically, if their kids get in and go, it would be free. Which
because she works there,
right, the
yeah,
owner's wife works at the school.
yeah.
Um, now, and I shared a bit about this in the article series. Different private schools have different deals. Some it's like that, it's like it's free, but only at that school.
Yep.
Or for others, they'll cover a certain amount if it's an accredited school. But for instance, Duke University requires a copay where basically you have to pay out of pocket for a significant portion. They also warn if your kids are going in-state in North Carolina, the copay is going to be more than that. So like
Yeah.
Duke is not going to fund you to go in-state in North Carolina, but if you're sending them to a private school or to Duke itself, it could help. So that might be an advanced topic, right? If you're listing and your spouse is a match to potentially work in higher education, they might be able to get some sort of a deal, but like check on the particulars. It's not a guaranteed free ride.
Yeah. And your kid's not going to be upset that their mom's at school now and they can't get away from them. So, but that's a different
I mean,
conversation.
yes, that could be a factor. Speaking of school expenses, I just shared a link in chat. There's a GIF New York Times article. This just came out about Vanderbilt apparently is on track to be the first school charging $100,000 a year all in. And they note, of course, that most people are getting discounts, but it sounds like most people listening here aren't going to get discounts. Although if the price is $400,000, uh,
You might qualify for some aid there, even if you have a $300,000 income. It's
yeah,
likely.
wow. Um, so are there some ways that you've seen? I know we talked about, you mentioned talking with your kids, say freshman year of high school and maybe sooner. Have you noticed any ways to get kids more involved in the process?
Yeah, it's funny. I really think money is the best way to do it. Like, I hate to say that,
Okay.
but if you can incentivize your kids to apply for scholarships and say, hey, if you get an academic or athletic scholarship, I'll pay you, cash 25 to 50% of whatever that scholarship is. It
Mm.
could really incentivize them to take it a little more seriously and appreciate the expense that college is. The other piece of it that I think is more important is to encourage kids to look around for jobs that they want to do. What interests them? Is there somebody in your network that they could talk with or go out to lunch with and ask, do you like your job? If you were to talk to somebody getting into the field, what would you recommend them to do? Could I do an apprenticeship? Can I learn more about it? You
Yeah.
know, that is probably the priority number one. Beyond that, if we're just talking about paying for college, incentivizing them with money to apply for scholarships or save money in college goes a long way.
That makes sense. I remember shadowing a lawyer. I think in high school, I was thinking of, do I eventually want to become a lawyer? And I saw he was a, fellow William and Mary graduate, or I guess this maybe I was early in college. I was doing this. And we went to court one day. He explained, he's usually not going to court and all. And then we were back at the office the second day. And I met a bunch of his lawyer friends at the courthouse. And he was like, "Oh, this is Karl. He's a student. He's thinking of becoming a lawyer." Every single person, there were like six people, every single one half joked, "Don't do it." And I remember thinking, like I was probably, I don't know, like 19 years old. I remember thinking, okay, they're half joking, but they're also half not joking,
Yeah.
and I reflected on that. I was like, this is one of those like the idea makes sense, but I don't want to be a lawyer specifically. I was more interested in business. And so I didn't pursue it. And I mean, saved 3 years and however much that would have cost
Yeah.
by not going to law school, for funsies.
It helping a child find a career feels a lot like helping a child find a car. There's
Mm,
going to be some draw there based on things that may not matter to you as the parent, right? So there's some glory for certain jobs that are more than others. Maybe, this car's a bigger engine, but as a parent, I think it is your job to throw up little guiding conversations, assuming your kid will still listen to you,
mhm.
or maybe find a friend that they'll listen to and have them throw in guiding conversations. But
Yeah.
there's little things, like if they're up in the air between physical therapy school and a finance major, talk to some recent graduates in PT and finance and see which one you like their life of more. I've had a lot of friends go through PT or become nurses, and they really like the job, but they didn't realize the pay ceiling was so low. And they want to live in a big city, and so it just doesn't work. Like the student loans that came along with it make it so that they can't have the life they want to live. And so now they're all transitioning to medical device sales to go make more money and not use this degree they went to school for 3 more years for, maybe one more year for. And
Yeah.
so I think there is just, it's important. You don't want your child's expectations to not be met. That's the only time people get upset when their expectations aren't met, right? And a lot of people think, "Oh, I'm going to be a doctor of physical therapy, or I'm going to be this OR nurse.
Mhm.
And that's going to reward me because it's a hard job, it's hard dedication." That's not always the case in our world. And
Mm.
so helping your child understand what real life looks like after this route can help them make a good decision. And I think that's important to do as a parent.
Makes sense. I'm a huge fan of informational interviews. Over the course of 9 months in 2009, 2010, I did informational interviews over 9 months with 75 different people. And that was really helpful in figuring out what I did and didn't want next. And as a potential shortcut for that, I saw this book recommendation recently, shared it in chat. The book is called What's the Right Career? Useful Real Life Advice for High School and College Students from 50 plus professionals. This is by Tad Berkery. And my understanding basically is he's like, as in high school, he was like, what do I want to do? And he started interviewing people, and he's now at Johns Hopkins, and he basically turned it into this book of these interviews. So, it's a great starting point.
Yeah.
I read through it just, it's just interesting to see, path not taken kind of thing. And there are jobs that I'd never heard of before. Which I think raises, I mean, I think a lot of times as we think about careers and then think about majors, we just go off of what we know of, but that's not a full picture of everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
For instance, say on the medical route, there's the idea of like become a doctor. And as I think back, everyone I knew from like freshman year of college whose goal was to become a doctor is now a doctor.
Yeah.
And, at this point, 20 years after graduation, they've probably paid off their loans, or, what one hopes kind of thing. But I mean, that's not the only path. There are various allied medicine roles. There's nursing. You could become a PA or nurse
There's
practitioner.
research. There's all, go work for a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, I mean, you also have the option. There's the MUD-FUD MD PhD programs where the government will pay you to get the PhD and medical degree in exchange for the assumption is you'll primarily be a medical researcher. So you may still be practicing medicine, sort of, but that's not your primary thing, and you're
Yeah.
not making $500,000 a year. But you also don't have any debt.
Yeah.
So
But
it's
it's worth
what you want.
some of this honing in, you're trying to find, okay, where's supply and demand lining up? And it's worth looking, hey, where's the biggest job need in the
Yeah,
future of America? What are the best opportunities within that job need? Let's
yeah,
go that direction. They're going to be hiring. You know what I mean? Versus I'm
right.
just going to get a communications degree and hope it works out. And what a lot of people did at the school I went to. And they make the same, the buddy who's doing the line work out in the power lines and the storm hits, and he gets his, 5K paycheck for the week.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, in terms of other questions, oh, inflation. So, I
Yep.
know that in the past there have been a lot of articles about college expenses going up faster than inflation. Uh, what rate should people consider inflation if they're saving for the future?
Mhm.
Their kid's not going to school right now. How would you think about that?
So from 2000 to 2019, I believe, college costs on average, again, they're very different
Mhm.
inflation amounts based on the college you're going to. On average, inflated 3 to 5% between private and public schools.
Okay.
But from 2019 to 2023, they inflated at -% So prices actually went down over that period of time. Now, again, COVID was during that period of time. And I
Right.
think it made some people step back and think, oh, is this the route I want to go? Especially when the college experience is now being removed because I'm going to be in front of my computer.
Yeah.
And so, will that decreased demand continue? I'm not sure. I would say that I would expect inflation to be lower than it was from 2000 to 2020. And so I would expect a 1 or 2% inflation rate going forward, depending on the school. The higher demand the school, the more I lean towards 2%. The lower demand the school, the more I lean towards one.
I talked to someone who I'm curious about how Duke University has risen in the rankings so quickly. 100 years ago, it was, a small school and they get the money from the Duke family, and then now, is a top 10 program. And someone was explaining it's not just because of that initial endowment. The school figured, you know what? The better we are at sports, the more people want to go here. Thus, we can be more selective. And it became well, at least for Duke, a virtuous cycle of being
Yeah.
charged more and more. I mean, imagine that that's the case, say, in Iowa after this year's basketball season.
Yeah, I know. Sports definitely play a big role. I went to App State as well. And so after we beat Michigan in '07, applications went through the roof and it's a whole thing. So,
Imagine. Well, speaking of applications, I have an App
oh,
State transfer admission brochure here. So I recently took a photography class at the community college here in North Carolina, and it was like a non-degree, non-credit kind of course. But I noticed there was a lounge area, and they had a bulletin board about schools that students have transferred to from the community college. And there are also brochures. For instance, there's a guaranteed transfer to UNC Chapel Hill. There's a similar program for NC State. And there's, more stuff on transferring to App State and to ECU and others. My understanding is that a lot of states have some sort of guaranteed transfer program. It varies by state. There's certain, minimum GPA you need to maintain, and you need to kind of pre-apply and things like that. What kind of savings or what have you noticed around the go to community college for 2 years and then transfer for year 3 and 4? What have you seen on that?
I mean, you can save if we're just talking about like going to CPCC, Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte, and transferring to App, you're going to pay $5,000 to $8,000 per year at CP versus 25 at App. So, you're saving 30, $40,000 for those 2 years and transferring. And a lot of those kids take their education more seriously in the first 2 years of CP. There's less distractions. You're less likely to go party every night and stay out like you're probably staying at home or don't have the same party scene. So I think it can be really good for people if you're more inclined to party and you struggle with school and you're going to college. I'd say the 2 year route at community college may be a nice place for you to get your feet wet before you get thrown in the deep end.
Especially if you're living at home and you've eliminated the sort of your family's incremental cost
Yes,
kind of pieces.
as long as your parents can stand you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess thinking, for anyone who's listening live or on the recording, if you're thinking of an option where your kids would live at home, either for community college or potentially if you happen to live near a school, I mean, like, I'm within commuting distance of UNC Chapel Hill and Duke, NC State, if you want to, deal with the traffic, to Raleigh kind of thing. Any tips if people are thinking about, oh, well, maybe they stay at home. I mean, things to think about. Like, do you need a roommate agreement? Should they be paying rent? Like, how would you approach that?
For the child staying at home,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, if you live at home, there's nothing really you need to send to the school to say that you're not going to live on campus.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, all it really does is save some money. The only thing is if you wanted to withdraw from your 529,
Mhm.
you could charge your child some rent at like, market rate and do a 529 withdrawal for it, but
Okay.
that's marginal savings.
Got it. That makes sense. And I guess ultimately, like you have to decide, is that worth it? I am really glad that I went a couple hours away. Like
Yeah.
it was nice and worth it. Let's see. So and of course, if people have questions, if you're on live, go ahead and share in chat. Let's see. Now, what about uh, any advice for moderate income families? So some people listening may be, say, in an executive role in an agency where they're paid well, but they're also not on the hook for pass-through profits, for instance. So their,
Yep.
annual gross income may not be, that high. What would you recommend they think about in terms of college and retirement?
Yeah, I'd say if your income as a single individual is below 160 or married is below 240, then you could look at saving within a Roth IRA for college savings. And that allows you to kind of save for retirement. But also, what not everybody understands is all contributions into the Roth are always accessible. So you
Mhm.
don't have to wait till you're 59 and a half. You don't have to wait 5 years. If you contributed to it, you can pull that out tax and penalty free. And it is a way where you just need to keep track of it. So if you contribute $6,000 per year or $7,000 per year, you get a catch up, whatever it ends up being. Say you have $50,000 of contributions by the time your kid goes to college, you can withdraw that and use that as a college fund, and all the earnings are still tax and penalty free as long as you save them for retirement. But that is a great way to balance that retirement and college savings if you are below those income thresholds.
That makes sense. And I assume the Roth IRA custodian would have a record of what the actual contributions were. So you'll know what the number is.
Yeah, assuming you don't change custodians. Yes.
Got it. Yes, that makes sense. So I saw some discussions recently around the topic of agency owners and divorce. There's even a joke about should that be like a special channel in Slack in an agency group? Obviously, that's a tough spot. I realize that a divorce settlement likely will include something about college responsibilities, but I guess anything to think about if it comes to the worst kind of thing
Yeah.
around paying for college and divorce.
Yeah. So my parents actually divorced when I was 15 and we had to figure out paying for college. And most of the times, not all the times, but divorces, there's typically some financial turmoil going on there. Not everybody is seeing eye to eye in the divorce, they're trying to hold on or grab as much as they can get during that time. If
Yeah,
you can set that aside and, agree on who is expected to kind of contribute for this college, that's great. Outside of that, the only kind of hack that there is if there is a high income earner and a lower income earner in a divorce, then the lower income earner can technically file for FAFSA to find financial aid. But they need to be able to argue that they're the primary caretaker and financial contributor to that child's life. If somebody else is paying for everything, then that person needs to file for FAFSA. But if the lower income earner is paying for everything for that child, then they can file for FAFSA. And, if it's a teacher versus a agency owner, there's probably going to be a pretty big difference in income over there and qualification.
that makes sense. And now, if someone say they get remarried, is their new spouse on the hook as well, or not if they don't? Or I realize that's a more specific question.
Yeah, but if they get remarried, then the new spouse needs to apply. It's part of the FAFSA application because unless they're, I mean, yeah, they're going to be part of it. Even if even if you try to get away from it, I don't think it would be worth it to jump through all the hoops that would take them off of it.
Makes sense. I mean,
Because you would have to like not get married, basically.
one of the themes here is basically like the government will know or find out, and
Yeah,
or the college as well.
yeah.
Mhm.
And something I don't know, and maybe worth looking into, I don't think it's a strategy to do married filing t separately for taxes and then apply for FAFSA that way. I'm pretty sure that doesn't matter, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So, I know you'd lose certain tax benefits by filing separately. Although I recently read about, I guess when you file jointly, you are personally responsible for anything on the tax return. There's an example where a woman's husband had died and left her with a $91,000 tax bill because he apparently had not paid the taxes. I think it started at like 60, 65,000, and now with interest it was higher. And she had claimed innocent spouse relief, which is an option to, get released from that. However, apparently the tax court found she was posting about buying designer handbags, doing, expensive trips to Hawaii, and basically it was sort of like she should have known, so
Yeah.
she's still on the hook for the full almost $100,000.
Yeah. The only time I'm aware that married filing separately really is a strategy is more in terms of paying back student loans. So if you're on like a federal payback program where it's income-based repayment, then you can file separately and say one spouse makes 400,000, the other one makes 20 or stay at home.
Hmm.
You could married filing separately. And if the one staying at home also has the high student loan amount,
Hmm.
then their income-based repayment could technically be $0.
Hmm.
And if you're on the new SAFE plan, interest doesn't accrue, and then it's forgiven um, at that level in 20 to 25 years. And so that's all. That's the only strategy I know regarding married filing separately.
Makes sense. And I know there are programs like the public service loan
The
forgiveness
PSLF, yeah,
was disastrous on the administration of it, though apparently they're getting better. Things
yeah,
like that. Of course, there's also, my parents are both career Army officers. For my dad, undergrad paid for at West Point, and then, both in terms of, graduate school. I mean that is a huge commitment, certainly not for everyone.
yeah.
Uh, but there's certainly options. So as we get into the home stretch on today's conversation, are there certain questions that tend to come up over and over again from your clients? I know we've talked about some of those. Are there any other things coming to mind?
Yeah, the main one is the Roth IRA and 529, how much to save per month, and planning ahead on what to communicate to your child and what you're going to cover. The only other one, is how do you navigate graduating in 3 years versus 4? Is that rewarded for the kid?
Yeah.
And then do you want to communicate that you'll pay for A's and B's in state, or do you want to tell them they can apply anywhere and move forward with that? So that's just a conversation to have at home and uh, part of the freshman sophomore year college talk.
That makes sense. So they can decide, how much they want to stretch. Do they want to
Yeah.
take AP or IB classes or dual enrollment community college courses?
Yep.
Will they graduate from undergrad faster? If
And
they're
most people say we'll pay for A's and B's in state. Um, that's pretty much committing to $25,000 a year, assuming they pass other classes. If you open it up to anywhere out of state, you could be paying 100 grand a year.
growing up, my parents' guidance was basically anywhere I wanted to go that was in state or equivalent in price.
Yeah,
Like that was the universe,
yeah,
kind of thing, which still had options, which actually, in terms of geographic arbitrage, I have some clients that have moved for various reasons, but often they have another state in mind that is a match for their retirement, and so they move there early. Any pitfalls that people should consider if they're thinking of moving to another state, either for in-state college or for tax savings or other things, any pitfalls to keep in mind?
I know that it is a strategy that the colleges are aware of. I
Okay.
need to refresh on some of that though. I think you need to be there like 2 years ahead of time, and you need to actually have your mailing address there and receive things there. You need to have a lot of proof of it
So
because
if
some
you
people will just change their mailing address but they won't actually live there.
got it, got it. So basically, if you are fully moving to the new place and there's enough time, you'd probably be fine on that. But if
Yeah.
you do it just for this purpose, you're probably, that's not a good idea.
The hard part is like a family has a vacation house at Lake Kiwi and they're like, we're gonna in-state for Clemson. And it's like you need to like actually live there and go to high school there sort of thing, not just go to the vacation house once a week.
Makes sense. Okay. Final question for today. You know, is there, if there's certain things that people could take away, and I know you mentioned, having the talk, committing to savings, things like that. Um, are there any common mistakes that people are making that you could help people listening avoid?
The biggest mistakes are not saving early enough and waking up and just being like, oh, I have to pay $150,000 for the next 4 years and I'm not prepared for it. That's really the biggest one. Outside of that, it's over promising to kids. They just want to be the hero. And
Yeah,
I understand that, but it's also hard. If you're going to buy a Ferrari, which is a similar cost in a lot of parts of the country for your child, is that the most responsible thing to do? To just buy them this thing just because it's the next thing to do. Uh,
yeah,
and there's even the difference in school cost, if it's 250 versus 100,000, that's still a Ferrari. And is the education worth it? It's not thinking through the payoff on the other end of it and helping their kids think through what life looks like after college.
that makes sense. So really, it's not just 4 years, it's the time before, the time in, the time after. It's a big decision, and it sounds like, if for anyone listening, if you haven't sat down to have that conversation with your spouse or ex-spouse, and then with your children, that's gonna it's important, rather than leaving them wondering and getting in trouble yourself.
Yeah. Or just being stuck in a job they hate that they never thought through and they just kind of fell into.
Like they didn't have six lawyers say don't do it.
Yeah. They just ended up
Here's
going to
your
law
problem.
school and they're like, wow, I should have done this.
Yeah, wow. One of the things that stands out from our conversation is around, after a certain point, the best way to save more is by making more. I mean, I've talked about that in my book, Work Less, Earn More: How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. It sounds like, if you're underpaying yourself now to make the business profits higher, that doesn't help for college aid, because the pass-through profits are still showing up on your tax return, things like that. Like there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
You might as well
Yeah,
make.
no, not a large free lunch. Not unless there's divorced and you can do that filing thing, but outside of that.
Got it. So if people would like to get in touch, I know you're able to work with people all over the US. Where should people go if they'd like to get in touch about potentially hiring you, or getting more help?
Yeah, thank you. My website is the best way to get in touch with me. It's www.flatfee-financial.com. I do financial planning for almost everybody, but I've started to target more business owners like dentists, some CPAs actually in town, and some construction workers. So there's a lot of planning around the business owners that you can have a lot more value add from the financial planner side of things. You just have more levers to pull over there. So I enjoy that.
That makes sense. And I've shared a link in chat, and we'll have that if you're watching the video description, flatfee-financial.com.
Yep.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate all of your insights, and thank you again for volunteering to join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Carl.
And that concludes Agency Office Hours for April 2024. I'm Karl Sakas. We're meeting here every month to answer your questions. If you have questions you'd like to ask at a future event, more open-ended about running your agency, growing, helping you work less and earn more, include your question when you RSVP. We'll let you know if you're on the list ahead of time. And in the meantime, if you're in the midst of supporting your kids around college applications, or they're coming soon. Good luck as you're dealing with that, and good luck with your agency. Thanks.